Hello everyone and welcome back to ASP.NET Core 1.0. My name is Steve Bishop, and in this video we're going to talk about routing. So in our last video we were putting up a URL in our browser that looks something like this: http://localhost:52577/home/index. Now, obviously, there's different components to what's going to be in this URL based upon where your server is that you're hosting your application to, etc., etc. But I kind of want to break down this URL a little bit so that you can understand some of the different components. First, the HTTP section is your protocol, and you might have something like HTTPS if you're using some sort of SSL or TLS certificate to encrypt your connection. Then the localhost 52577 is the server and port that you're hosting your application on. So that would be the host URL. Localhost is another name for your local computer. It's kind of a universal name for PCs of the local computer that you're running off of. So in this case, localhost is referring to my local computer that is my development box. Now, IIS Services is hosting this application on port 52577 so that it doesn't collide with any other ports that might be working on my computer. Now, both the protocol and the host are really managed by your network, firewall, and server. They're not part of the ASP.NET Core MVC stack. So as such, we're not really going to get into any of that in this series. You're probably going to want to talk to your IT to find out more about what your specific URL is going to be if and when you decide to make your application public. Now, after the protocol and host, we get the home, the /home, and it turns out this is a reference to the controller of our application. So this is a user making a request to our home controller, and on that home controller, we're further indicating that we want to go to the index action. Now, the controller and the action sections are managed by the MVC framework. Now, the way that the MVC framework understands that home should be mapped to controller and index should be mapped to the action is through a thing called a routing template. And a routing template is nothing more than just a string where you can see inside of curly braces we indicate where the controller should be, and then inside of curly braces we indicate where the action should be. We also have a / here, which is an actual character that the user must type between the controller and the action as part of the URL. Now, there are other options that we can put inside of a template to make it more flexible. We could do things like setting a default. So here we're saying that the default for the controller value is home, and the default for the action value is index. Now, sometimes a user also needs to pass along a parameter as part of a URL, and in that case, we can put somewhere along here, inside of curly braces, the name of the parameter that we want to allow the user to have. And in this case, we have a question mark after the name of ID, indicating that ID is optional. That means the user doesn't have to put a value in here for ID in order for the URL to be resolved. So now let me show you where the routing template goes. And to do that, I'm going to have to hop back into our Visual Studio window. So here we are back at our startup class. And in our configuration of our middleware, which is the configure method, we were saying use MVC with default route. That was the extension method that we were using to use MVC. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out, and we're going to set up our own routing. To do that, I'm going to use the app object, and I'm just going to say use MVC. And when I do that, you'll see that we get one of two overloads. We get just without anything passed in as a parameter, or we can pass in an action iRoute builder, and that parameter name is called configure routes. And you can see here configure routes is a callback to configure MVC routes. So this is accepting a lambda expression. And for those of you who watched my C# course, you did not learn what lambda expressions are. They're used quite extensively in the C# language. But I'm going to show you right now how the code that you're going to need anyway. So even if you don't know what lambda expressions are, you should be able to follow this along just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and put my semicolon there at the end anyway, because I like to complete that whenever I can. And now I'm going to create my Lambda expression. I'm just going to use routes goes into a new, let's see, routes. Okay, and we're going to use the map route method. And in the map route method, you can see it accepts a string for name and a string for template. So this name of our this name parameter is the name of the route. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this default because this is going to be our default route. Then as our second parameter, it's going to be one of those templates that I showed you on in the PowerPoint presentation. So I'm just going to go ahead and use for now, I'm going to say controller, and I'm going to go ahead and set the default to home, and then / action equals index. And let's go ahead and end that. And I'll even kind of make this look a little nicer here. All right, so there we go. That is our default route being mapped on our within MVC. So let's go ahead and save this. And I'm going to go ahead and run the application. So sure enough, we get hi there, Steve Bishop, which is exactly what we expect from our index action on our home controller. But just to prove it to you here, I'll just go ahead and do / home. And we can see once again, hi there, Steve Bishop, and / index also gives us hi there, Steve Bishop. So we're getting the same result that we expected from when we were using the with default route extension method in our middleware setup. So what about that last template that we showed on the slideshow? Well, I'm going to go ahead and add / and then in curly braces, we're going to do ID ? And end curly brace. So let's go ahead and save that. And now what's going to happen is that if somebody puts as part of the URL after the action, they put a / and then any sort of value, then that value will be assigned to a parameter called ID. From there, we can go to our controller, and on the index action of our controller, we can create a parameter that will accept that value. Now we need to name this parameter the same as what we put it here in our template. So since the name of this parameter is going to be ID in the template, we want to also say that this is going to be ID as the parameter for index. If these two values do not match up, then it will not match the signature of this index action, and you will have problems finding this index action. So just make sure that the value that you're putting inside of here matches to that parameter name as part of the template. So now that we have an ID parameter here in our index action, let's go ahead and add it to our model data. And in order to do that, I need to actually go to my contact object. So we're going to go to the definition. Let's go ahead and add new prop, type int. We're going to call it ID, and let's go ahead and save it. And yes, I know I'm using camel casing here instead of Pascal casing for all you sticklers out there. I did notice that. It's just kind of a habit that I've gotten into to use camel casing, but I probably should be using Pascal casing. But that's okay. So now I can go ahead and set the ID value on my contact object equal to the ID that's being passed in as a parameter. So there we go. We're setting ID on my object to ID that's being passed in here. So once we've got that, and this model is now being passed into the index view on my in my home folder, let's go ahead and use it here. So we're going to go ahead and say your ID is, we'll do model.id, and that should be good enough. So let's go ahead and save that, and let's go ahead and run it. So the result this time is, hi there, Steve Bishop, your ID is 0. So where did that 0 come from? Some of you might be asking. Some of you more experienced C# developers probably already know, but let me just go into here and show you. Since in the middleware, when we created our template, we said ID was optional. That means that no value was passed in as a parameter. But then on our index action, it's expecting some sort of parameter. And a default value for an int, since it cannot be null, an int has to have some sort of value, C# automatically makes this int a value of 0. So int, since it can't be null, it's 0 instead. So 0 gets assigned to the ID for our contact object, and that is how you get your ID is 0. But now what we can do is up here in the URL, let's go to home/index, and we'll do 6. So home index/6. And now we'll get, hi there, Steve Bishop, your ID is 6. And that's because ID was, once again, passed in as a parameter to the ID parameter, and that was added to our contact model, which was passed into our view, and then the view, of course, uses that here to display as your ID. Now, you don't have to use the name ID here. In fact, if I change this to parm, then we can save it as parm is going to now be the name of the parameter or the value that's going to be saved. So we'll go ahead and name this parm as the parameter. And now we can set ID equal to the parm value and save that. And let's go ahead and run it there. And now let's just prove this by doing home index, and we'll say /12. And you can see your ID is 12. So it doesn't really matter what you name your parameter here that you're allowing for to be an optional parameter, just so long as the name of the parameter here inside of your action matches what you're naming it here as part of your template, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and change this back to ID because that is a best practice. Most companies prefer that you name an ID because ID is going to be a unique key generally. And I, of course, need to fix this here in my code. Okay, so now that we're done showing you parameters and using the default template, let's go ahead and talk about adding additional templates. So I'm going to go back to my startup class, and on the routes object, you can actually add multiple routes using the Fluent API. So that just means I can just simply say map another route. And this one we're going to go ahead and call members. Now, in this new template that I'm creating here, I need to make sure that it is distinct and different from my default route. So I need to do something like, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and say, if somebody wants to get to the members section, the first part of the URL that comes after the host needs to be members. So they're going to type members as part of the URL, then /. So these are actual characters that must be typed in the URL in order for the user to get to this members section. And now from here, we can go ahead and say controller, and I'll call this member home because it's going to be a different controller altogether. And we'll say is action equals index, because index is perfectly fine for an action. And we'll also say /ID ? And so there we go. We've mapped an additional route called members. Now the user must type in, once again, after the host, they must type members /, and then the controller name, action, and any sort of ID parameter. So let's put this into place. I'm going to go ahead and create a new controller, new item, and we'll call this MVC controller class member. I believe it was members, right? Member home, just one member. Member home controller, get rid of the one and add. We're just going to go ahead and leave the index method in place as it is, and it's just going to return an index view. So I need to create a new folder under the views folder, and this is going to be member home, because once again the folder needs to match the name of my controller. And under this we'll go ahead and add a new item, a view page, and we'll do HTML, and we'll say the title is members home, and this is a members only section. All right, let's save that. So that is our index that's going to be on our members member home controller for the index action. And once again, the default template, when the user goes to the members, members /, they're going to type in whatever the controller is going to be and then the action, but there is a default of member home and index, which we just created here in the member home controller index action. So let's go ahead and save that and run it. Okay, so at first we get our default location because the default template is what picked up our request at first. Now we're going to use members, and if I hit enter, you can see this is a members only section. So right after the members, it then used the default template, or excuse me, the members template, and it said the default controller was member home and the default action was index, and I can go ahead and just do members, member home, and you can see same result, member home, index, same result. So that is how you can set an additional route, an additional template for your routing. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. I know that for a lot of people this routing component is a little bit on the more complex side. Some people just prefer to use the default routes at all times and just kind of manage their application with that. I've seen plenty of applications that do it that way. They don't use any of this custom routing, but I really wanted you to understand how the routing underneath it worked, so that you understood how the default worked and how to create your own routing, so that you could kind of tailor the application to your own needs. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop me a line in the comments section of this video. I do what I can to answer whatever questions I can, but please don't feel bad if I don't get to yours. Sometimes I'm just busy and I miss them, but I do what I can. Anyway, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.